Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Vihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jayo Radha Vallabha Shri Radhe Jayo Jagannatha Baladeva Jayo Subhadra Jayo Gauranitai Jayo Gauranitai Prabhupada Jayo Jayo Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashtottara Shata Shri Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki janitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to His Divine Grace. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gaurav. Shri Shri Shunyavadi Pastate Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirayet Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatiruttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. So Hare Krishna, welcome all of you for today's discussion of Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. We are reading from Canto 6, Chapter 16, verse number 5. The chapter is titled as King Chitraketu Meets the Lord. Verse 5. Bandhugnātyari madhyastha mitro dasena vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Bandhugnātyari madhyastha mitro dasena vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Bandhugnātyari madhyastha mitro dasena vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Prabhuji. Bandhugnātyari madhyastha mitro dasena vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham Bandhugnātyari madhyastha mitro dasena vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Bandhu jnatyari madhyastha. Sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Mataji's. Bandho jnateri madhyastha. Sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Bandhu jnatyari madhyastha mitro dasina vidvishaha. Sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mithaha. Word to word. Bandhu, friends. Gnati, family members. Ari, enemies. Madhyastha, neutrals. Mitra, well-wishers. Udasina, indifferent. Vidvishaha, or envious persons. Sarve, all. Eva, indeed. He, certainly. Sarvesham, of all. Bhavanti, become. Kramashaha, gradually. Mithaha, of one another. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In this material world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally, they mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Purport. It is our practical experience in this material world that the same person who is one's friend today becomes one's enemy tomorrow. Our relationships as friends or enemies, family men or outsiders, are actually the results of our different dealings. Chitraketu Maharaja was lamenting for his son who was now dead, but he could have considered the situation otherwise. This living entity, he could have thought, was my enemy in my last life, and now, having appeared as my son, he is prematurely leaving just to give me pain and agony. Why should he not consider this dead son his former enemy, and instead of lamenting be jubilant because of an enemy's death? As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 3.27, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Factually, everything is happening because of our association with the modes of material nature. Therefore, one who is my friend today in association with the modes of goodness may be my enemy tomorrow in association with the modes of passion and ignorance. As the modes of material natures work in illusion, we accept others as friends, enemies, sons, or fathers in terms of their reactions of different dealings under different conditions. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishna Vamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakham Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yam pravrjantam anupeta krityam dvaipayana viraha katara ajuhava putreti tanmayataya taravo bhinedu stham sarvabhuta hridayam munimanatosmi. Hare Krishna. I'll read the translation again. In this material world, which advances like a river, that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally. They mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. So, welcome all of you for today's discussion. Now, I was just contemplating, why am I even speaking in here, sitting here in this glorious temple of Srila Prabhupada? This is a very heavy section in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, where a father has lost his son. And what has been discussed here is the foundational aspect of spiritual life. This is the foundation of spiritual life. Attachment to Deha, Geha, Putra means body, one's family, one's home, one's identity from an external perspective. This coming out of this identity is the foundation of anything, foundation of spirituality actually. So although I'm not realized in these advanced topics, I seek the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and all the assembled Vaishnavas and his glorious organization, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And I consider myself to be fortunate to be able to even speak these topics. And I'm speaking only purely for my purification, and most of what I speak is theoretical, and I'm made to realize the depth of these topics. Now, before we discuss, let us see a brief background. I know all speakers are discussing the backgrounds, but I was interesting to know where, in terms of meditation, where are we today? The verse we are discussing today. If you see the last chapter, which was 15, chapter 15 was Narada and Angira Rishi instruct King Chitraketu. That was the chapter. Now in this chapter, interestingly, it seems as if Chitraketu does not know their identity. Because he says, you must be Angira or you must be great sages, because in 15 he is glorifying. He glorifies all sages. I have heard among great perfect persons wandering the surface of earth, and he also takes the names of Narada and Angira, although Narada and Angira were present in front of him. So he glorifies. And then Angira Rishi begins to speak to Chitraketu in the previous chapter. And when he speaks, Angira Rishi interestingly says, I gave you a son. So it seems as if Angira Rishi had the power to bestow a son to the king. It seems quite strange because these days you go to a doctor, sometimes childless couple don't have a son despite being attempted in the hospital, and the doctors try a lot. So begetting a son also, we must understand, is only by the mercy of the Lord and not by a physical endeavor or by a biological endeavor. It's very important to understand. I remember from my childhood, I used to go to a place called Mantralayam. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's on the border of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. And it is the place of a very renowned Madhva saint called Raghavendra Swami. We just celebrated his Aradhana Mahotsava in the last, during the time of Balaram Purnima in the Madhva Sampradaya. Now here, near this ashrama, there is a place called Bichale where his disciple used to live, Raghavendra Swami's disciple. And this place is quite powerful to if somebody goes there, they can beget children. The reason why I'm saying this is, I had a cousin who was childless for many years. And somebody asked him to go here, and they are proper Vaishnavas, of course. And they said, as soon as the priest there saw him, he said, oh, you're suffering because you don't have a child. And he didn't even mention that he didn't have a child. So he said, you need to do these samskaras, and you have to stay here for 3 days, blah, blah, blah. And then, lo and behold, in a year's time, they had a child. Now, we might, in the modern terms, call it coincidence, but the point is not that we have to go to these places to beget a child. The point is the power that these sages and these pilgrimage places hold, that they can bestow something which science, modern science cannot, who blindly believe science. That's what I mean. So just wanted to mention that. So here it seems that the king is unaware of these two sages, and the sages are bestowing the mercy. And now the section has come where the child has passed away. And Angira Rishi is saying, we have come for a specific reason. And they say, Itham tvam putra shokena magnam tamasi dustare atad arham anusmritya mahapurusha gocharam anugrahaya bhavatah praptav avamiha prabho brahmanyo bhagavad bhakto navasaditum arhasi. They say that we have come here for what reason? Because you are brahmanyo bhagavad bhakto. You are a very advanced devotee of the Lord, so therefore we have come to awaken you. So we saw yesterday, Mathura Manohar Prabhu also was saying how he was a Kripa Siddha devotee. He was gaining the mercy of the sages. And there we see in the last chapter, they're exactly mentioning that you are a devotee and therefore we have come. But what I found interesting is the way these sages are preaching to this guy. It seems as if it's a big psychological operation. It's a complete psychology. If you really see, they saw Chitraketu was interested in material things. So what did Angira Rishi do? How did they treat this disease of material affliction for the king? So Angira Rishi saw that King Chitraketu was a devotee. They did not preach him Krishna consciousness directly. But what did they do rather? What was the psychological analysis and operation they did? They gave him a son. They gave him a son, and they also kind of wished that the son leaves his body very early. So Harsha Shoka was given a name for him. Now the king has lost the son, and he's lamenting. And now we are at a stage where the sages are not speaking. Do you notice the sages haven't spoken, but they have called back the jiva into the body of a son, and they're asking the son to preach to his father. So how interesting, how deep psychology is this? It's quite deep, isn't it? And now for a while, think about it. If I have a child who is 5 years old, he gets up and he tells me these advanced topics on the face. As a father, I might become very happy. Oh, my son is very advanced. But what suppose that same son walks out of the house and takes sannyas? Then it becomes challenging, isn't it? Till he's preaching, it's very nice. Look, my son is preaching so nicely. He's become an advanced devotee, right? But the same son says, from now I break my relationship with you. You are no more my father, I am no more your son, and I walk out of the house. And he walks away out of the house and he takes Tridanti Goswami sannyas. It is very painful for the father. Now if you just contemplate, just before the son walked out of the house, the father seemed to be happy. But when the son walks out of the house, he feels pain. Why is that? Because the happiness that he was deriving from the preaching of the son, the center of that happiness was still me. Because I am proud that he is my son and he is preaching, you see. So in the same way, it's very painful for Chitraketu to see that his own son is saying to his father that you are not my father. Which father are you? Which lifetime's father are you? So the son is preaching to the father like this. And that's when the father's heart, which is immersed in deep affection with the child, is smothered into pieces. So it's quite hard for the father to take. In the first canto, the second chapter, Shukadeva Goswami says, Bhidyate hridaya granthis chindante sarva samshayah kshiyante chasya karmani drishta evatmanishvare. The whole purpose of spiritual education is to cut the knots of material affliction, actually. It's not to make us comfortable in this material world. This is the hard fact of spirituality. To cut the knots of deep material affection, especially of son, children, family, wife, home, one's identity with the country, race, religion. All of these are material identification because they are related to the body. Because they are related to the body. And this is not our identity. And that is why Bhagavatam is quite blunt in these situations. In this verse, the child saying, Bandhu gnati arimadhyasta mitro dasi na vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mitaha. Just like a river. So here, Shukadeva Goswami or the child is using a metaphor of a river. Why is river being used here as a metaphor? And what is river compared to? What is the river being compared to here? The material world. Why is it compared to the river? Why is the metaphor of river being mentioned here? See, we recently had floods in the Queensland and the other regions of Australia. When there is a fierce river which floods, it doesn't consider anything in its way. It can just flood and just devastate everything. That is the power of nature, actually. And all man can do is make grandiose plans to escape it. The advancement is to escape only, not to stop it. Is it not? All the forecast is for us to say how quickly we can run from that place. So that is all our advancement has taken to. So the river, when it floods, we've seen, at least I've seen it in the videos, not experienced it, that when the river floods, we had a big flood in Germany last year, I think. We could see that the river, with its huge current, it was just dragging everything with it. It was dragging the houses, the hills, the rocks, the roads, everything was destroyed. Because it's quite powerful. The river, especially when Ganga flows, if you see the Rabhasa, the current of which Ganga flows, it's quite powerful. It's very, very powerful and fierce when water flows. And when this water flows, why is the metaphor very relevant? Now imagine the water flows here and there are two sticks. And these two sticks come together in that current. And and it flows together for a while and then two sticks separate in that same flood. So in the same way, the material world also is like a river and it's flowing fast, fiercely. And in its flow, it brings two jivas together. And when the two twigs come together, the jiva thinks, oh, she's my wife. Oh, he's my husband. Oh, he's my child. Oh, he's my father. Oh, he's my mother. And very quickly the river separates it. But now the twig comes together and there is a bond between them, you see. And that bond of affection binds them. And when they separate, this bondage causes pain of separation. And that is why material world is compared here to a river. You see, it's merciless in one sense. But just because the twigs came together, there is an affection to them. The jivas, but actually, they are no one. They are not related at all. we are not related. We have been eternally alone in one sense, but it seems the crux of this verse is relationships. And this relationship is the cause of bondage, which is the cause of pain due to the separation. You see? And here Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura takes it to a different level. He says, why don't you consider that the sun was your enemy? Why is Thakurji writing like that? Why is Chakravarti Thakur writing like that? Because, again, it's psychology. Because the son has departed very early, it's causing intense pain and grief to the father. So who causes intense grief and pain? Only an enemy causes intense grief and pain. So therefore, Chakravarti Thakur says, maybe he must be your enemy, so he's passed away very quickly and causing pain to you. So consider him as your enemy who has come to give you pain. So, imagine the psychology with which this is being preached. It's amazing, isn't it? But interestingly, here, the son speaks about various kinds of relationships. We'll just sneak peek a little bit. How many relationships he's speaking about? Bandhu, Gnati, Ari, Madhyastha, Mitra, Udasina, Vidvishaha. How many? 7 relationships. And each of these have different connotations. And one has to contemplate, why is he even mentioning these 7 relationships? There are 7 different relationships he has mentioned here. Bandhu means friends. Bandhu. Gnati means family members. Ari means enemies. Madhyastha means neutrals. Mitra means well-wishers. Udasina means indifferent. Vidvishaha. Dvisha means enemy. Vi means, when you add vi, it becomes viparita. Viparita or vichalit or envious or very envious persons. I was thinking, why is the son even mentioning these 7 kinds of relationships? Is he just mentioning it like that? Or is there a deeper connotation to these 7 relationships that one can foster in one's life? Interestingly, the biggest psychologist, who is the biggest psychologist ever known to mankind? Anyone knows him? Lord Krishna. Is one of the biggest psychologists. It's interesting. There was a very famous psychologist in Bangalore. And interestingly, one of the Acharya visited him. And this psychologist behind his chair had a big Bhagavad Gita photo with Krishna preaching to Arjuna. You see that, the one he's sitting on the chariot. And the Acharya asked him, oh, you're a psychologist, you seem to be a medical man, yet you believe in mythology like that? Krishna, you put the photo of Krishna and Arjuna. You should have put photos of the greatest thinkers and medicinal people. Why have you put religious symbols in your office? So then the doctor says, actually, he's not just a religious man, he's just not God, he's one of the biggest psychologists. He was referring to Krishna. So Krishna, in the 6th chapter, interestingly, says a very similar verse like this. 6th chapter is also called as Dhyana Yoga. In that, in verse number 9, Krishna says, Suhrin mitrari udasina madhyastadveshya bandhushu sadhushvapi cha papeshu samabuddhir vishishyate. So here also he is mentioning Suhrin, Mitra, Ari, Udasina, Madhyastha, Dveshya, Bandhushu. 7 relationships. It's very interesting, isn't it? And he says, Sadhushvapi cha papeshu samabuddhir vishishyate. I'll read the translation Prabhupada writes to us. A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral, mediators, the envious, friends, enemies, the pious and the sinners, all with a samabuddhir vishishyate, with an equal mind. Why this is important? We will just contemplate a little bit. And why this is relevant here, and what is the operation going on through the sages to the king, we will see how this is related. And this is related to the chapter title, actually. Now in this verse, you see Krishna has mentioned, And what's interesting is Dhyana Yoga is the chapter just before which chapter? Or which section of the Bhagavad Gita? Bhakti Yoga. Before Bhakti Yoga begins, Dhyana Yoga. That's why Dhyana Yoga is a very critical chapter. Dhyana is very important because without Dhyana, one cannot start Bhakti. So therefore, Krishna prepares one's spiritual intelligence and mind before they enter into Bhakti. So therefore, Dhyana Yoga becomes very important. And this verse is even more important because this is the position of a yogi before entering Samadhi. Samadhi, if you see the 9 limbs of yoga, which is starting with, what is that? Yama, Niyama, Asana, Dhyana, Dharana, and then comes Dhyana and Samadhi. So Dhyana is just one stage before Samadhi. Samadhi means what? Sama-adhi means that is the stage in which I see the Lord, I encounter the Lord. That is Samadhi. I am one with the Lord in one sense. You see, in qualitative terms. So to come to that stage, Dhyana is very important. And for that stage, this Dhyana, this particular verse is very important because we'll come to that. We'll hold on to that thought before for the time being. Krishna is mentioning 2 types of friends in this verse. Suhrin Mitrari, 2 types of friends. Suhrin means one who helps anyone without anything in return. He's Suhrin. Krishna says, I am Suhrit. In Bhoktaram Yagna Tapasam, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam. He is the actual Suhrit, Krishna says. But generally, we also have Suhrit in a material realm also. Mitra is one who he won't help anyone, but will help his friend when he's in distress. You'll see all these types of friends. There are friends who will help you nevertheless, and there are friends who will help you only when you're in distress. You see, so Sanskritam, there are classifications. Suhrin, Mitra, there are different types of friends. In English, you just have to say friend or maybe mate. In might, in Australian accent, see might. So, 2 types of friends. And he speaks about 2 types of tathastas. That is Udasina and Madhyastha. What is Udasina? In Hindi, Udasin means it's being sad, but that is not the meaning of Udasina. Udasina means he's not unbothered. They're unbothered. Majority of the people in the material world today are Udasina. They don't care. They don't care whatever is happening, they're busy. You'll see in the trams, they're all with their earphones. At least before the advent of this devices, people used to read books or talk to each other, but everybody's with their earphones and they won't speak to anyone. The moment somebody starts chatting, they become angry. How dare you intervene in my pleasure? So they are Udasina, they're not bothered about anyone. So they're in one sense Tatastha, they don't interfere in anyone's business. It's good in one sense, but it's bad in another sense. And Madhyastha means he will interfere but will not take sides of anyone. Madhyastha, Madhya Sthita, he's Madhyastha. So that you will see all these type of people around us. And then he'll talk of 2 enemies, Ari and Vidvishaha. In this case, he also spoke about Ari and Vidvishaha. Here, Ari and Dveshya in 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Ari is an enemy, but there are 2 types of enemies. Ari means one who will slaughter and murder, one who will cause harm. But Dveshya or Vidvesha means one who is envious. He will not harm, but he is breeding envy. So there are 2 types of people who will not like you, and some people will not like you and will harm you also. You see? So, and now if you contemplate why these classifications and what is the significance of this particular classification. The significance of this is for any spiritual practitioner, his whole world revolves around relationships. Relationships, even with devotees, you see. We have all these kinds of, we have Mitra, Suhrid, Bandhu, and Bandhu is a separate classification on its own. Bandhu are our glorious relatives who become angry when you become Krishna conscious. They will start expressing their love when you really become Krishna conscious. They will say, how dare you become Krishna conscious? You should have been a Christian, you should have been a that, you should have been a this, you should have been a science, you should have been a teacher, you should have been in a material world. So they will express love only when you become spiritual. They are called as bandhus. So in material terms. So therefore, bandhu gnati ari madhyastha mitra udasina vidvishaha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramasho mitah. Why this becomes important is for a pursuer of spiritual path, the stage before he enters samadhi is dhyana. Dhyana means unwavering attention to the Supreme Lord. To come to that stage of unwavering attention, you should go beyond these relationships. That's why he says, samabuddhir vishishyate. You have to be equal to everyone. One who is friend, one who is dvesha, one who is ari, one who is an enemy, one who is a well-wisher, one who is a bandhu, one who is a relative. Be samabuddhi means don't be disturbed by these relationships. Otherwise, one cannot come to the stage of dhyana. So that is why the child, the sages, now coming back to the verse where this is being spoken in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, the sages are doing this operation on Chitraketu. Why? Why are the sages making the child speak this to the king? Because they are preparing Chitraketu for what? See the title of the chapter. What's the title of the chapter? Because they are preparing him to see the Lord. If you want to see the Lord, we cannot still be attached to our material relationships. We have to become indifferent to those relationships and establish the supreme relationship, which is Jiva and Paramatma, Jiva and Krishna. To do that, the operation, the psychological operation or psychological, what is it called as? Counseling that the sages are doing through the son is, now you grow beyond these relationships that you identify yourself with. So therefore, it's very apparent of why these relationships are being mentioned. In fact, the acharyas say, all of the relationship in this material world can be classified in this 7. You name any relationship in the material world, it can be classified under these 7 headings. There's nothing beyond these 7 headings. So therefore, Krishna, who is the biggest psychologist, also mentions the same 7 positions. And the reason he mentions that is, Jiva, because of the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, Prabhupada writes in the purport, Prakrite kriyamanani gunahi karmani sarvashah. Because they function under a specific mode, one sees one person as an enemy, one sees one person as a friend, but all of these are temporary relationships. They have nothing to do with the individual consciousness called Jiva. That is why this verse becomes very important. Now, one has to think, why even mention the relationships? What is the Sanskritam word for relationships? Someone? Huh? Vyasa? Rasa? No. What is the Sanskritam word for relationships? Sambandha. Relationships are very critical and important for a practitioner of spiritual consciousness, especially when we are Gaudiya Vaishnavas, because our whole philosophy revolves around relationship. Sambandha. Sambandha. That is why the idea is, hey, Jiva, you're trying to build relationships, and all of the relationships that we see in the material world can be only classified under these 7. Bandhu gnati arimadhyastha. Grow beyond these 7 mundane relationships and establish the supreme relationship, which is Krishna Sambandha. So therefore, our acharyas have established that Sambandha Jnana is actually the foundational aspect of our spiritual practice. So we have to come to the point of understanding. So what happens is, a jiva has innate sambandha with Krishna. That is the real relationship in the spiritual world. Now, because this material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world, every jiva is actually searching for that sambandha. But he's trying to search that sambandha in all their individual units. Oh, he's my father, he's my mother, she's my wife, he's my child, and I love him, I love her. I'm trying to build that sauharda within every relationship, and each of these relationships will give us pain and pleasure at all times, which will eventually end in pain. because death will finish all these relationships. So therefore it's very painful. But we are trying to find that eternal sambandha in all of these relationships. So therefore relationship is very important. Prabhupada says in a morning walk, wherever you go, there is some relationship. This is words of Prabhupada to Swarup Damodar Maharaj. Wherever you go, there is some relationship. That interrelationship already is there. I am walking on the sand, so I have got relationship. If the sand would have been soft, I could not walk. So the relationship is already there, intermingled. So everything around us has a relationship with us. We are sitting on this floor, we are inside this magnificent temple, we are in Melbourne, we are sitting in front of Radha Vallabha, Gaurnitai, we are sitting in front of Prabhupada, reading his books. We are all related in some way. But Prabhupada culminates by saying, but what is that center of that relationship? That is wanted. As long as these relationships are connected peer-to-peer, in network terms, in IT, Prabhu might know, Prabhu is a doctorate in wireless telecommunication. Peer-to-peer means what? Connecting individually. That is where the problem is. Prabhupada says, where is the center of this relationship? If the center of these relationship becomes prominent, which is Krishna, then this relationship becomes important. Then this relationship becomes credible. Otherwise, they will only cause us pain. That's what Prabhupada says. That is wanted to know. That is God. Prabhupada culminates this in his morning walk. So therefore this verse becomes very important for us because it paves the way for Chitraketu to establish his eternal relationship with Krishna before he witnesses the Lord. King Chitraketu meets his Aradhya Daiva, which is Sankarshana. Now for us in the practice of Gaudiya Vaishnava, who gives us that relationship to Krishna? Who bestows us that relationship? Or who gives us that sambandha jnana? Through whom? And who is prominent in our disciplic succession? Srila Prabhupada's Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. If you go to his pranati, if you go to his pranam mantra, Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Kripabdhaye. The name of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had another name. Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Dasa. That was another name of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhave Namaha. He is the one who bestows Krishna Sambandha. So, in our Acharya's disciplic succession, it is through Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and through Srila Prabhupada which comes to us and we establish the relationship of Krishna Sambandha. Krishna Sambandha Vijnana, the knowledge of this Sambandha, which is Sambandha Jnana, is given to us by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But among the Goswamis, who is our Acharya, who establishes the Sambandha? No. Sanatana Goswami. So Sanatana Goswami is our Sambandha Acharya. Rupa Goswami is our Abhideya Acharya. He tells us how to follow the process of bhakti. That's why we are Rupanugas in one sense. But to establish the Sambandha, it is Sanatana Goswami. See, Sanatana Goswami establishes it. Rupa Goswami gives us the process. And Prayojana Acharya is? I think it is Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami. And interestingly, we have relevant deities also. Madan Mohan is our Sambandha deity also. So you see, Sambandha Gyan pervades our philosophy. And therefore it is very important for us to know how do I develop that relationship with this eternal object, which is the absolute truth, who is that Vrajanath, who is Krishna in Vrindavan, through the medium of our Acharyas. And our Acharya Paddhati is to establish that relationship to Krishna. And how do we establish that relationship? Who is the object of our relationship? Through whom do we establish the relationship to Krishna? Spiritual master. And eventually that leads us to? Not to Krishna, actually to Radharani. Because through Radharani. Because there is no Vrindavan without Radharani. We say there is no Vrindavan without Krishna, but actually there is no Vrindavan without the Vrindavaneshwari, which is Radharani. So therefore our Acharya disciplic succession is in the service of Radharani, eventually to please Krishna. You see? So therefore, this Sambandha Jnana is given in all the Acharya's commentaries, in all the Acharya's teachings, through the Bhagavatam, through the Sandarbhas, which eventually establishes this relationship with Krishna. So therefore, it becomes very important to understand and analyze our material relationships, how to purify them, and what is the solution to purify and make these relationships credible. Otherwise, these relationships have no value. There is no value. Why are we all related? We are all related because we are devotees of Krishna. If Krishna wasn't there, we were not all related here, isn't it? We are here because the center here is Krishna. The center here is Radha and Krishna, actually. So therefore, it becomes very important. So the whole idea of a spiritual practitioner is try to discover our true relationship with Krishna, so that the idea is not to sever our relationship in the material world, but to spiritualize our relationship with the material world. That's the whole idea. To say all my kith and kin, my bandhu, ari, mitra, they all matter because they are... See, for example, if we have relationship with the devotees, let's say there was a fight between a devotee, or there is a love between two devotees, affection between devotees. All of this is there, even if somebody's, for example, somebody is not happy with the devotee, they still move on. Why? Because there is Krishna in the center. You see, they still come together, serve Krishna, because here the focus is Krishna. The focus is not us. The focus is not my ego in the center. We replace our ego with Krishna. No, we have to serve Krishna. So, in this advanced science of Krishna consciousness, the foundational aspect is to establish the Sambandha Jnana through the teachings of our Acharyas, and come to the real realization to establish that relationship, and to come to a point of dhyana. When we hear Vishnu Sahasranamam, when I was a child, I used to hear Shubhalakshmi, before M.S. Shubhalakshmi, who is the singer of this Vishnu Sahasranamam, before she starts Vishnu Sahasranamam, she says, Dhyanam. She starts like that. Dhyanam is very important, because when we start any seva of Krishna, we should meditate. Meditation means we have to bring our consciousness to focus to Krishna, that we are serving Krishna now. Prabhupada used to say, you are dealing with Krishna, be very careful. He used to say, warn us. So, why? Because we have to be alert. So therefore, when we have to be alert, we have to keep all these relationships to the side. Oh, I don't like him. Oh, I like him. Oh, I love him. Oh, I have affectionate towards him. No, I'm envious of him. We have to keep all these relationships aside, and we say, no, we are two devotees serving Krishna. Come to that eternal relationship and then serve Krishna. So this is a very critical factor for us to come to the point of dhyana before we enter the position of samadhi, when we are actually doing service of the Supreme Lord. So therefore this becomes very important. So I'll stop here. If there are any questions or comments or corrections, we can discuss for a while. Yes, Savior. Yeah, very nice question. Thank you, Savior. The question is, in the Bhagavatam we see Prahlad Maharaj prays for his father. We see the relationships doesn't have to be severed, but it seems as if I spoke that we have to sever the relationship. Actually, severing means not gross severing. Severing means in the consciousness that one should not consider oneself to be father. Prahlad Maharaj asked his father to be excused, not because he was his father. Prahlad Maharaj did not see him as a father. Prahlad Maharaj saw him as a suffering jiva. In that sense, he was praying for him. Of course, he was his father, but he severed his relationship with his father, because how do we establish this fact? We establish this fact by the mere circumstance that Prahlad Maharaj was present when Narsingha Dev split open the chest of Hiranyakashipu. Did Prahlad Maharaj cry and shout, "Oh, you killed my father"? He did not. So therefore, there was no affection towards his father with a fatherly affection, but his affection was that he was a jiva. So please deliver this jiva. A devotee severes the relationship means he goes to a higher relationship, that I am connected to you as a jiva because we both are eternal servitors of Krishna. So this is a higher relationship. We don't sever, but we build better relationships. This is the whole purport of this verse. Elevate yourself from a mundane attachment to a higher attachment, that we are related because we both are Krishnas. We are related because I am your father or you are my son. That's a lower relationship. We are related because we both are Krishna's servants. So therefore I am showing you compassion. So Prahlad Maharaj's prayer for his father was out of compassion because he considers him as a jiva. And he's also a jiva. So therefore he prays to, like how we pray for others. So he was also praying for his father. And the fact that he did not get disturbed when Nrsingadeva was doing his operation was the fact that he was not attached to his father. It's quite painful for a 5-year-old boy to watch that ghastly scene. And he was not disturbed. He was not crying. Nrsingadev, you did this to my father. He didn't say that. Does it answer your question? Prabhuji, you want to say something?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes, Prabhuji.
You mentioned that Bhaktivedanta Maharaj has the Sambandhacharya quoting his pranati. I haven't heard that before. Of course, I heard the pranati. So I just want to understand, is there more understanding about Bhaktivedanta Maharaj as the giver of Sambandhacharya? Or is it like, for us, for example, for followers of Prabhupada, for us, Sambandha, Abhidaya and Prayojana are coming from Prabhupada, primarily. Even though
Yes.
the Sambandha Acharyas are
Yes.
Swami.
Yes.
So just wondering, how can you understand Bhaktivedanta Maharaj specifically as the
Sambandha.
Sambandha?
How I want, I'm too puny to speak it, Prabhuji, actually, but I'll speak because for my own purification. How I've understood is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is coming in one sense, how I've understood is our Gaudiya lineage has two phases. One is their presence in the Vraja Leela, Rupa Goswami being Rupa Manjari. But we also have a disciplic lineage in the Acharya lineage like Rupa Goswami and the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. When Saraswati Thakur came, there was gross misinterpretation of the relationship of the gopis and Radha and Krishna's worship. So the primary duty that we see, Saraswati Thakur also says that I came here to give something superior, but I wasted all my time clearing the weeds in the jungles. But his only purpose was to establish the real teachings of Rupa Goswami. And in his pranati it is said, Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhave Namaha. To establish the real sambandha between Radha and Krishna and the gopis and the connection between the jivas and the Supreme Lord in the service of Radha and Krishna both. So he is Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine. So that supreme science of Krishna Sambandha Vijnana, he is the one who came to bestow upon us. But to bestow that, there were two hindrances, which is Shunyavadi and Nirvisheshavadi. So he came to give, but he spent his time weeding out the jungle. So therefore, that preaching of that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Vani was carried further by Srila Prabhupada. So therefore, he is Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. And like that, it continues by the devotees and the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. And we continue to establish that connection, clearing out the misconception and establishing the true connection, true sambandha, and true understanding of the genuine sambandha gyan between the jivas and the lordships of Radha and Krishna, worship of Radha and Krishna, in the lineage of the gopis and the lineage of the parampara, is what my understanding, Prabhuji. But if you can add.
It's very interesting. It's a good one. And why I started thinking because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that was his concern about the Mayavadis, because he specifically wrote on that point. So that's why, of course, he was not the one who was established the preaching mission in that sense, because he didn't branch out or anything of that sort. Or he did, but he was more writing
and he was presenting to the intelligentsia. That was his thing. So just wondering that he himself presented a lot of Sambandha Gyan, and it is very, very specific in Jaiva Dharma and other books. It's very, very, very clear. Just making a point. Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
So, Prabhu is saying that Bhaktivinoda Thakur also established the Sambandha, and it is true, yes, Prabhuji. I stand corrected that, yes, all our Acharyas have established Sambandha. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur kind of revoked it in the sense of his time that he had to clean up the lineage in one sense.
That was one of the prime duty of Bhaktivinoda Thakur.
Of Bhaktivinoda Thakur also, yes, yes. In his writings, yes. Yes, Prabhuji.
Generally, we consider him as the first revival.
Yes, yes, Prabhuji. And Bhakti Sanskrit. Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Prabhuji.
You mentioned how, to some extent, we should sever our material relationship with our family if it's not in the purpose of serving Krishna. But then, as Vaishnavas, we understand that one of our duties is to actually support our family.
Yes.
So Prabhupada did at his final days, it was providing financial support.
Yes.
But in the sense is that if we can see that our family members aren't necessarily going to pick up the Krishna, so this
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and then the service that we provide them is purely for their maintenance or for their sustenance in an extent. How do we kind of rationalize this as a service to Krishna, or that it's not further, I guess, training us in, I guess, deepening our conditioning to this body, what a good relationship with that?
Just opening something. So, let me understand your question. On one end, the devotees, we understand we need to sever our relationships with our family so that we can advance in Krishna consciousness. But at the same time, we shouldn't be abandoning our family. So how do we bring a communion with these two seemingly opposite understandings? I was reading a blog from a Back to Godhead magazine written by Prabhupada's disciple, Keshav Bharati Dasa Goswami Maharaj, about he serving his mother in his last stages. It's quite an interesting blog, where he spends many months of his deceased mother until she passes, leaves the body, and how in the end she becomes a devotee. A devotee does not sever relationships with anyone actually, because when we become a devotee, we accept the whole world as our family. Why only my father and mother? So this is the devotee's heart. Devotee wants to deliver everyone. They want to take everyone to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. So when we say, time and again, in India this has become a big thing, that when somebody goes and joins ISKCON, people say he's running away from his responsibilities. It is not so, because when a devotee severs relationship in the beginning stages, there are two stages of a devotee. In the beginning stages, a devotee wants that solitude so that he can strengthen his spiritual consciousness. So therefore, he practices solitude. He says, no, let me be alone. Sometimes when we become angry, we go and lock ourselves in a room. This is exactly what a spiritual pursuer will do. He will go aloof, he will practice in solitude, but he will eventually come back and try to establish that relationship back with his friends and family, but in a superior way. And you have noticed this. So we go back to our family, but we will show them love and affection, but our mood is not that I want to get love from them, but somehow I have to bring Krishna in their lives. Is it not? So therefore, the severing is only temporary for a higher attachment. So therefore, here you see Keshadas Goswami here, Keshav Bharati Goswami's example. He became separate, but then he came back, and what happened because of that? It's a superior attachment. So therefore, we do not sever completely, but we, just like, somebody is doing medical studies. If he has to study, he goes and studies in a hostel, and then after he studies, he comes back home. So very similar. a sadhaka practices in solitude, strengthens his spiritual abilities, and then goes and builds that relationship with his family again. Because otherwise, the material world, it sweeps us into the attachment, and without our knowledge, we can become attached again. So therefore, a serious practitioner says, let me become strong in my practice, and then when I'm strong, not be wavered by their material affection, go back and give my affection to them by bringing Krishna in their lives. So therefore, we do severe, yes, it is a fact, but it is only temporary to strengthen ourselves, which is we see in material world also. Right? When an army personnel has to go and practice, like I went to a camp called Specialized Training Camp when I was a naval cadet. It was a 4-month camp. So we were near the river all the time practicing because I was a sailor. So 4 months I had not met my parents. And after 4 months I had to see because I was not allowed. Because if I leave the camp, my training's gone. So the same way, when you come back, you're strong enough so you can go back into the society and preach. So this is exactly what we do. But we don't sever permanently. We actually become more compassionate for all living beings. Why only humans in that sense? This is my understanding, Prabhuji. Does it make sense? If there are no questions, we'll stop here. Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrind ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari.